Okay, hello. I'm Blake Tedder, the Communications and Engagement Coordinator with the Duke Forest Teaching and Research Lab at Duke University. This is the fourth video in the Ask a Scientist series from the Office of the Duke Forest. Our goal is to engage our community with science and introduce you to some of the researchers and the cool research happening out on the Duke Forest. The questions we will ask our scientists are for non-scientists, submitted by you, non-scientists, and asked by me, a true non-scientist. Find out more about the Duke Forest at dukeforest.duke.edu or by signing up for our newsletter or following us on social media. Today we're delighted to have Imari Walker. She produces entertaining, easy to understand YouTube videos focused on plastic pollution, chemical exposure from consumer care products, and the environment. Imari's travels have influenced her concern for the future of clean, accessible water and our growing islands of plastic pollution in the sea. Imari Walker completed her Bachelor's of Marine Science at the University of California, Berkeley, and is a PhD candidate in environmental engineering at Duke. Her research investigates the fate, occurrence, and transformation of plastic additives within water. To accomplish this, she does analytical environmental chemistry, aka forensic science on identifying plastic additives. And just a little plug for Duke's Civil and Environmental Engineering program. Their research in environmental health engineering addresses the consequences of society's production and use of energy and materials, emphasizing approaches to protecting health and human populations and predicting, monitoring, and managing impacts on the air, water, and other global cycles. They work closely with our friends at Duke's Nicholas School of the Environment in numerous research and educational initiatives. Imari, we're so glad to have you here to have a conversation about plastic.
Thank you, Blake. I'm happy to
Yeah.
be here.
Thanks so much. I've got lots of my own questions, which I'm sure I'll slip in there, and we've got some great questions from some of our stakeholders. But first, we'd like to start with some standardized questions for each interviewee. So, what do you study generally, and what's exciting about it to you?
In general, I'm studying plastic pollution, and that goes from just large pieces of plastic to microplastics. And my main goal is to understand the chemicals that were used to make that plastic or unintentionally added into that plastic and how they end up in our water, whether that's fresh water, drinking water, our oceans, or even, the stomach digest of a bird or a fish. And so really trying to understand what those chemicals are, how they change in our environment when you expose light or temperature or, any of the other environmental factors that you can think of, and see how those chemicals change into things that could be more harmful or less harmful to our environment and to our own health. Um,
Gotcha.
oh, the exciting part. Well,
Oh,
it's always
sure.
exciting to identify cool things. So I think the most exciting thing for me is to really learn the methodology behind it and trying to understand like what are these chemicals and like what impact does it have for all of us, and the fact that it has so much relevance to us on a daily basis. We
Mm.
wake up, we flip on a light switch, it's plastic. We pull up our phone, it's made with plastic. Like there's so many implications for our own lives with this kind of
Mhm.
work.
Great. Thank you. Well, how do you study those changes? I'm sure there's many different ways, but yeah, those changes to uh, the chemicals
Oh
being leached from
yeah.
plastics. How do you study that?
So some of the chemicals I look at are well known, like bisphenol A, and that like with
Is
that
that
kind of study, it
BPA?
yes,
Is okay,
BPA, so
sure.
BPA free water bottles and all that good stuff. But
Familiar with that?
to study that kind of stuff, we use what we call HPLC-MS. So it's just like a analytical chemistry instrument to really identify the chemical and how much there is present. And then for the ones that we don't know are present in plastic or in water or like the transformation products, we would use a high resolution mass spec to try and identify those chemicals by getting the exact mass of the chemical in our,
Mm.
like in our water. And then we do chemoinformatic tools and use other kinds of software to try and figure out what the structure of it is and match it to a reference standard that we could buy.
That sounds complicated
Oh yeah.
to me, a non-scientist. But wow,
Well,
wow.
And there's some other things as well. Like you have to understand, like, did I pull something out of our sample that's actually plastic? And like, well, how is the plastic changed when you expose it to light? So
Mm.
you have to do a little bit of work with like the Duke Smith, the Shared Materials Instrument facility, to use some of their spectroscopy for like identification of the plastic or the changes to the plastic surface, to even doing benchtop studies for this work, or even a mesocosm study.
Wow, wow. Um, those are all tools that nothing in my psychology degree or my social work degree prepared me to even talk about, much less
Right.
know what they do. But I'm just so impressed with you engineers and scientists who use these incredible machines at Duke. Um, so you mentioned mesocosm. What's involved with your research? I know your research location is not currently active in the field anymore, but what was involved in your research location in the Duke Forest?
Yeah.
Where was
So
it?
the project that I was working on in the Duke Forest was a mesocosm study. The ultimate goal of the study was to understand microplastics and their fate in our environment. And so this was plastic that is originally used to spray on shorelines to prevent coastal erosion
Oh,
from happening. And so the company that we were working with, they gave us this plastic in the form of microplastics, and they said, well, what is the fate once it's been exposed for long periods of time? And what the mesocosms are, they're with the Duke Saint, the Center for Environmental Implications of Nanotechnology, and they have what's called like basically a huge greenhouse full of mesocosm boxes. At the time, there was at least 20 boxes when they were in full-time use. But what the boxes were made with wood, and then they were also lined with a plastic, which was unfortunate. But they
that's a good
contained
point.
everything. They contained soil, water, plants, fish, snails, spiders, anything you could find in the forest probably made its way into the box on accident. We definitely had some tadpoles and some fun snakes hanging around, but the main thing was to really study dosing of microplastics into the water and where they went over time, over a year span, and just
Mm.
trying to get samples of water and sediment and other good stuff. And so that mesocosm is right off of Highway 751. It's always hard to find because it's like a really quick offshoot, and you have to drive like almost a mile to get into it, deep into
Yep.
the forest. But yeah, it was very interesting. It was maintained by Saint and run by them for that purpose.
And we had our last interview was with a researcher who uses kiddie pools as little mesocosms out in a for they study grasses in big fields, and so mesocosms are small little kind of self. I don't know exactly how you describe them, but they're little environments unto themselves. They're little ecosystems unto themselves that also have things coming in from the outside. How would you describe them
Yeah,
in better
yeah, I think
terms?
that you nailed it. It's just
Okay.
little miniature environments. Like
Okay.
they're supposed to, at least for these mesocosms, it's supposed to like mimic a freshwater environment.
Okay.
Since you're dealing with fresh water, and then a little bit of like normal plants you would find around there, and along with snails and fish. So yeah, it's
Okay.
really just to be a little micro environment to mimic what should happen in the real world, and it's exposed to a huge forest, so it's still realistic.
Okay. So it lets a lot in, but doesn't necessarily let some things out, like the plastic would stay in it, for example. That's you.
When you dose it, it's still pretty likely that those microplastics could have, evaporated and like went into the air or something
Oh
like
my
that
God.
from initial dosing, but they
I
were
did.
they were stirred in water first and then dumped in. So yeah, it's not as likely for it to leave the water and go into the air. It's more of, if it's in the water, is it going to go to the plants? Are the snails going
Mm,
to eat it, or the fish going to eat it, or is it all just going to end up in the sediment? And how long
wow.
does it take for it to get into the sediment?
Well, you just blew my mind a little bit. I didn't realize plastics can just go up into the air. Um, that's new for me, so I'm super excited to learn about that. So the last question of our pre-formatted questions. There's why, and this is pretty obvious. I think anybody watching this would understand why this is pretty obvious, but why is your research important in your field and or to the general public?
I think that we've been working really hard on trying to get people to think about what kind of plastics we're using on a daily basis, how that will impact our oceans, but we have to think about it from our own human health perspectives and environmental implications. We don't want to destabilize a species with microplastics or just, it's not aesthetically pleasing to have a bunch of human trash on this, the side of the road. So this kind of work is really to try and better finish the story of like, why is plastic bad? Like, why do we not need to overproduce it just for the sake of producing it?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, like just adding the chemical perspective of, hey, you should be aware of the chemicals that are actually inside of your plastic.
Mm. Okay, well, I think there's a lot of questions we have about plastics, so and about chemicals that we find at home. So let's jump into some of these. I think we'll start with this kind of personal question. At what point did you realize plastic was a problem in your life?
I think that it never occurred to me until I started the PhD that plastic was so huge and ubiquitous. And it's very interesting because my other colleague in my lab, Anna, she started a year after me. And so she was really like gung-ho about plastic pollution and like mitigating the amount that's being released into the environment. And so when we were living together, we really kind of worked together to try and find more sustainable options and like just made me more aware of the fact of like, oh wow, like every time I choose to pick a single-use plastic bag, like that's, that adds so much more to our environment.
Hmm.
And so I think the PhD in itself and studying this work was very important to my own journey to trying to be more sustainable.
Hmm. Okay, so it started with a little bit of a personal reckoning around your own plastic use. So let's go to the other end of the spectrum. What's the biggest plastic pollution problem in the world right now? Is it something that is in a single location, or is it something that is a behavior, or is it something that is something that we don't know about that happens in this one region? I'm not sure. What would you say?
Man, there's a lot of big issues. It's really hard to kind of pin it down. I think it's everywhere. I think it's single-use plastic in general is pretty big. It's one that we can work on to more easily mitigate right now. But really highly developed areas like America, Europe, Asia, where we are producing so much plastic waste. And then the biggest issue is that at least in America, we'll take all of that waste that's supposed to be recyclable and then we'll ship it to another country for them to deal with it. But they don't have the infrastructure to actually do it properly without endangering other people's lives. And so there's a lot of environmental justice implications behind plastic to not even just like the end of life, but even the beginning of making it. You need oil, you need to take crude oil to make plastic. And a lot of those refineries and places that you make plastic are in, communities of color, and they have to deal with the emissions that are associated to that in their own hometowns. So the plastic pollution doesn't just start at the end of its lifespan. It starts immediately from the beginning of time. So yeah, and like it's everywhere. We can point to the garbage or trash, but we're gonna find plastic pollution anywhere we look.
Mm. That's true. Yeah, it's ubiquitous, and I'll never forget when I traveled to India and I saw how different our society was. That hid our used plastic in other countries, but to actually be in other countries where it was everywhere, just on the ground, everywhere. It was stunning, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. What's up with that? Why doesn't plastic biodegrade?
So
I'm just
so it depends on the kind of plastic that you're using. There's not a lot of biodegradable plastic that's purposely made, but plastic just takes a very long time to degrade. Those polymer chains, they're very tight. Like you need a lot of exposure to sunlight to air, wind, abrasion, water. There's just so many processes that are going to take for it to slowly break down into smaller pieces of plastic. And that can take hundreds of years. So generations past our own generations are still going to be looking at the trash that we just threw out today. And so and it's not just that, okay, that plastic is now gone. It's, oh, you first have to become a microplastic. So now we're taking our larger trash and we're making it into microplastics that are also going to stay for a very long time period in the world.
Wow. Yeah, I find it helpful sometimes to look at a water bottle and realize it's going to outlive me in my own lifetime. This thing will be here for someone else to deal with. So what makes something a microplastic? This was a question. What makes something a microplastic? And what are more problematic, tons of big plastics or microplastics?
Yeah. What defines a microplastic is anything that's smaller than 5 millimeters. And I know metrics are always confusing. So the push pin on a bulletin board, the top of that is about 5 millimeters.
Oh,
So
wow.
anything smaller than that is usually defined as a microplastic. And then we get into the weird thing called nanoplastics, which most people are not ready to talk about those yet, because
No.
they're real small. They're all real small.
And they're probably real bad. And I don't want to know about them. I'm just kidding. Feel free to
They're
talk
scary.
about.
They're scary stuff, and that's the thing. We don't know a lot about them either. So they need their own field of study in itself, because you need different technology that we don't have right now. But whether macroplastics or microplastics are, which ones are the more problematic, I might be a little biased in saying that microplastics are more problematic because we don't have the tools right now to remove every piece of microplastic from our water or from our sediment. Like, unless we have a magical magnet that's just going to pull out only microplastics, which, I mean, plastic is organic matter, so it's very hard to distinguish it from some soil if you're, So the idea of actually removing microplastics in comparison to, doing some fishing net across the great garbage patch, it's very different. And I think that they're both intertwined because big plastic makes microplastics. And so if we can stop the tap of the flow of plastic into our environments that are degrading into microplastics, that would make things a lot easier than actually cleaning out microplastics.
So there's a lot more agency and consumer choice that we have with the big plastics, and it would stop the flow into the breakdown of the smaller plastics. That makes sense.
For some, I think there's other kinds of microplastics that we still have to ponder how to fix. Like, a large contributor to ocean microplastics are tire waste, like tire rubble. The fact that we all drive, well, we're probably not all driving as much right now, but anytime you get in your car on a hot sunny day and go for a drive, you're releasing microplastics from your tires. It's, when things go bald, it means you just released all that tire wear.
Oh, it goes somewhere.
Yeah, into our stormwater runoff.
Of course it
and
does.
So there we go. And I know that there's been studies done where after rain events, especially in the Pacific Northwest of America, after a big rain event, there's like the species of salmon that dies off almost every time.
Oh, wow.
And they've linked it to tire rubble, tire microplastic particles and the chemicals in them. And they're still waiting to publish it, but I'm pretty sure it had something to do with one of the chemicals in it. It's just eliminating a species. But yeah, that one we can't get rid of our tires.
Of course. One of the things you're making me beginning to tie together for me is that, and you said you study plastics in water, and it seems like there's this relationship to water and plastics and oceans, and water seems to be a big vector for pollution with plastic. And why is that?
So water is a huge contributor. I mean, you can trace a stream, urban runoff, all the way down to the ocean. So it's small enough to stay afloat. It's also small enough to be consumed and moved to a different part of the world. Air is still a vector for microplastics.
Wow.
I mean, my focus has been on water so much that I don't have as much information about air pollution, but
Sure.
there have been studies, like I know Nature just published a study in national parks where they found a deposition, yearly
Oh,
deposition of microplastics coming from the air. And they were able to characterize different kinds of microplastics that were coming from wind and things were coming from directly from rain.
hmm.
And then they were able to determine if the microplastics came from the regional city next door or were traveling around the globe. So microplastics almost have their own little wind currents that they travel on to remote parts of our world. And, we can even see that here in our national parks where,
Wow.
humans should be depositing plastic or microplastics, but the neighboring cities are doing it for them.
Oh, you know what is the depressing part about that to me? All of it. But what is also really depressing is I actually read that study, or at least I read the abstract of that study, and I blocked it out of my memory. And I think we all do that at some level. There's something that is so big about this problem, and it is at all these different scales. And it's so hard to just grasp what we're up against here. And on that, you had mentioned the Pacific trash in the
Oh, the
garbage
garbage
gyre.
patch.
Oh yeah, and I'm looking for the question. Someone asked, "What are your feelings about the Pacific garbage gyre?" I think I know what they are. And the ocean sweeping drones that are they really viable to pick up all the plastic?
The first thought of how do I feel about the garbage patch? I mean, it's not great. It's been around for a long time, and it just shows how much our own inputs have an effect on the rest of the world. And I mean, that garbage came from everywhere,
Can you
including our
describe what
own.
it is for listeners who may not know?
Yeah, so it's because of like ocean currents, it's basically gathering trash from around the world on this great ocean conveyor belt, and it's settling in the South Pacific Ocean. And so it's what's called the Great Pacific Gyre of plastic trash. So it's trash about the size of an island. It's not necessarily all connected; they're just like little patches, but the vast size of the amount of trash that's being accumulated is just staggering.
Wow,
And this is trash that's been around for years and just located in the same place. Um, but
it's
the question about
unbelievable.
drones, I haven't seen the drones that they're using for cleaning that up. I'm sure it'll do better than nothing that
Hmm.
but I think the other concern is that it's not just the surface of the ocean that we have to worry about anymore. Is, not all trash will stay afloat,
Yep.
especially when you have, microbial communities that come to live on it or any other marine communities. They're going to start to weigh it down and it's going to deposit into the deep ocean. And so
Hmm.
cleaning the surface of the ocean is still great. It's still a good step, but we've got plenty of trash at the bottom of our ocean that it's going to be a lot more difficult to remove, especially since we haven't even what is it? We don't even have the full geography of the bottom of the ocean right now. We have not been able to go to a lot of places on our own earth
Sure.
at this point, but
Hmm.
plastic has reached it first.
Okay, so I'm going to go off script from some of these questions. I'm depressed about this. How do you, as a researcher of this problem, how do you cope with the enormity of it?
Um, at least for me personally, knowing that I'm trying to add a little bit of knowledge to this bubble makes me feel a little bit better so that we have a better understanding of, okay, this is what's harmful, this is what needs to be fixed for the future. But um yeah, it's a difficult subject because it's something that we interact on a daily basis with, and you can almost feel guilty in a way for having certain things like or making a decision of, oh man, I just bought a coffee cup instead of bringing my reusable mug, and like just the weird feelings of like, okay, I'm not sustainable enough, I'm not doing enough for the world in this moment because of whatever situation that it is. So really just trying to come to terms with it and realizing like, I have to do my own thing to really make a difference. And sometimes that thing is continue to do more research on it and continuing to educate other people on this, because just my one, choice is not going to impact the entire world. But if we all make better choices, it's going to be better for us. And just remembering that I mean, I think consumers should do their best, but my main goal is to really change policy
Mm,
and to really think about a better circular economy for plastic, and just trying to find better alternatives more
mhm.
so than like, oh man, our world is, at a terrible point right now. And so really focusing on how we can change this and do better is more of how I try to get myself out of that.
Yeah. So yeah, it seems like you'd have to do that. There's a lot of there's a lot to focus on. I'm seeing that now. And this is a question I've always wondered. I'm glad someone asked it. I have heard that synthetic fabrics that we all wear now are producing microplastics in the environment. Are these materials really bad? Should I not be wearing them? Which,
Yeah, so I think this was kind of your other question about how do we, take care of microplastic fibers and stuff. The other large majority of microplastics that you find in our oceans or in our water are actually microfibers. They're
huh,
probably the majority that are coming from our clothes. They're coming from not only just that, but like our carpets and like
hmm,
our furniture or upholstery. A lot of that is made out of plastic now.
wow.
And question of should we be worried? I think I'd be more worried about its release into our environments, but we don't really know a lot about what like human health implications are. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
sure it's not beneficial, so I'm not recommending get your daily vitamin dose of microfibers, but it's
Well, this person actually, I'm glad you answered that question. Should we be worried? Because that's what I'm asking, and maybe that's what I said. But they asked, should I not be wearing them? Should I like not wear them at all? But
well,
worried, I'm already worried.
yeah, that's a hard question. And that's something that researchers still have to kind of determine what are the impacts of these fibers, because it's not just, microplastic fibers that have an impact on like our marine life, but like even cotton fibers can have some kind of impact on marine life. And we don't know the differences between natural and synthetic fibers and like which one's more beneficial than the other. But we do know that we're producing a lot more of polyester and rayon than cotton right now. And so
Hmm.
whether like those numbers aren't evening out. So if there were a choice to try and have, an even mix of, polyester to cotton and fleece and all the other good stuff, I would say, yeah, that's not a bad idea. But I think the focus should be more on, how much longer can you make your clothes last? Like before you
Hmm.
have to throw it into a landfill, or can you trade those in for a different outfit so that you can keep the circular economy of clothes going. Uh, yeah, I think for me, I'm less. We don't know as much about the human health impact versus the idea of fast fashion, like the fact that we keep buying so many clothes, so
Hmm.
often and changing things out. But if you can, instead trade around or rent clothes or all these other good things, I think that is probably a good focus at the moment until we know more. We do have a lot of studies of like model species like rats to see what might be an impact for human health. And I think one of them was like inhalation in rats could lead to like lesions in their lungs and all that other good stuff. But we
Oh
don't
wow.
know that for ourselves being a problem unless you work in like an occupational setting with textiles. That might be more of a concern.
Hmm.
But I mean, we consume microplastics every day. I think you should be less worried about microplastics in your seafood than the microplastics that are floating in your dust and settling on your plate in that time span. Where we consume like a credit card worth of microplastics almost every day.
No, you
And
quit it
yeah,
with those facts. I don't want to know that.
I
Uh,
mean, they're found
wow.
everywhere. And so they're in our water, they're in our food,
Right here.
yeah, good stuff.
Ugh, that's horrible.
And I mean, should we be worried? I don't know. I don't know. We don't know what the long-term effects are, but we haven't found anything yet to indicate like a huge
Wow.
problem. So the science still has to catch up with the state that we're in. But I mean, I'm currently still wearing a very old sweater that is definitely a mix of polyester and cotton. So
Hmm.
that's all my take on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's helpful. And I mean, if anything that I'm personally getting from this is just a new awareness and a reminder. It's not like we haven't, many of us haven't heard these things before, but it's Um, I appreciate getting the depth of the problem, the reminder of that, and the scale of it. We just have a couple more questions, and I may have to leave some of them. Um, let's see. Oh, I think this one's a good one just because it's about now. What does Imari think about the plastic use that has grown so much during the pandemic with to-go boxes and individual wrapping of food items and medical equipment? Is it a necessary evil?
Mm. I think especially, I think the plastics industry really saw this as an opportunity to get people back in their good graces.
Hmm.
So they were able to kind of overturn some of those bag bans that were happening in like California and other places for the sake of like, a few studies on whether COVID can live on reusable bags or not. But I think that now that we're realizing that, it's fine. It's just as safe to use a reusable bag than to use a single-use plastic bag. Things are changing, but I know that there has been a lot of campaigns to argue that single-use plastic is safer, more hygienic than any of your reusables. But a lot of people now are still using reusable cotton masks. Those are safe. Especially in comparison to the disposable surgical masks that are being
Mhm.
disposed of everywhere. So I do see that there's a huge problem with, seeing plastic gloves everywhere and those just disposable masks everywhere. But I think the focus should be on medical staff and researchers who need those kinds of items more so than, the daily public, in just getting more reusable items for themselves to just wash after each use. So I do think that they're getting out there. I think there was an article that was suggesting that we may have more plastic masks or gloves in the ocean than jellyfish at one point.
What? Oh my God.
Yeah, I think the Guardian released an article about that. I don't know if
Oh.
it's true, but I'm sure if we continue this, the trend of single-use plastic, it's likely to happen.
Hmm.
For medical waste, I mean that's just a fact of the matter until we have better alternatives right now. Uh, so that one might be just, yeah, we need that for them and to protect them. So, but for
Well,
us as public, we can do better.
yeah. And just the one of the last things I was thinking of, I do want to bring us to a close here, is that I haven't asked you kind of about how you are transitioning any research that you did in the mesocosms in the Duke Forest into where are you now with some of that research? This is one of my
Ah.
questions. How are you? Yeah, where are you in that research process?
So we had dosed the mesocosm in 2018, and we had finished it around August of 2019. And so we took samples at the first month, uh, and then like the first 5 days or so, and then 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. And we took water samples, sediment, fish, snails, plants. And my role with this project was to look at water and then sediment. So I've already done analysis of the water, and I paired it with a benchtop study as well to see, when you take all of these other confusing factors out of it, what is just going to happen to the microplastics? What chemicals are we going to find? And then if we take that microplastic and expose it to sunlight for basically 2 months and then put it in that water, how does aging the plastic have an effect on it? And so right now I'm still in the midst of identifying those chemicals and trying to see how they've transformed over that 1 year or over that benchtop study, and making connections between the two. And then I'm also currently working on the sediment and trying to like pick out microplastics from the sediment samples and then do some more identification of those to confirm that they're plastic, and then also determine how much they aged in comparison to each time point.
Hmm.
So that's where I'm at.
Great. And you're in a lab, presumably, right,
Hmm.
doing that?
Yeah, so I'm in Lee Ferguson's lab right now, uh,
Okay.
just working all that out, and then working in the Smith and all the other good stuff to do some identification work.
And you're able to go over there in the middle of this pandemic. You can't obviously do that from home.
Oh
So
no. Oh, this is all lab work, all good stuff. So yeah,
good.
you just set up your time and follow the safety rules associated to it.
Okay, well, there's a personal question that I think is wonderful, and I'd love it if you could share in case there's any young women that would happen to watch this video. In the Duke Today article, you mentioned not knowing of many Black female environmental researchers. What do you think we need to do this is funny. Oh, I get it. What do you think we need to do to stem that tide?
Oh man, that's great. Um, well, the first thing is that I don't think a lot of people know about environmental engineering in general. Like, what do we do? I know that when I first was introduced to that subject, I thought it was like all you study is poop and
Oh,
wastewater, which I mean is
oh,
true. There's a sector that does that kind of work, and so,
sure.
but there's just a lot more interdisciplinary work that's available to you in environmental engineering, like focusing on the drinking water side or doing air pollution, or instead of doing wastewater management, you can do actually waste management itself. So
Mm,
just, I think the education is really important to teach people about what kind of career they can do with this work and what kind of coursework is required and like how does that differ between other engineering subjects. I know a lot of people ask about like, is it math intensive? I wouldn't say
mm,
it's nearly as math intensive as like mechanical engineering or
sure.
electrical. So there's always opportunities to get involved in it. But the other thing is just seeing other mentors and role models that
Mhm.
will kind of continue to influence other Black female scientists that dream of doing this kind of work. And so yeah, I think that all takes time and takes a lot of mentorship and education for people to get involved in this kind of work.
Cool. Well, you're a wonderful role model, and you're really out there on YouTube and social media and all that. And I want to give you a chance to plug your wonderful YouTube channel at the end. But the last question I want to ask is just practical for everyone who's listening. What are the top few plastic things we could do to eliminate to better? Let me read this again. What are the top few plastic things we could all eliminate to be better stewards of the environment? And our water bottles really the biggest.
I think water bottles are a big component. In general, single-use plastic is a great way to try and reduce your impact and be a better environmental steward. So, say no to the plastic utensils when you order takeout.
Mm.
Uh, Try and not use as many disposable masks. Try to use your own reusable cotton mask. The other big one I'm trying to think about, like, I mean, even floss, those dental picks.
Oh,
Like there's like only so much floss, but so much plastic associated to them, and they find them on beach cleanups all the time.
hmm.
Making those like small decisions to remove some of the single-use waste, and then buying food in bulk, like at wholesale clubs, should help reduce some of that plastic use. And wash your clothes on colder temperatures because we're
Interesting.
releasing a lot of microfibers with higher temperatures and like more like stronger detergents that can tear apart the seams of a clothing.
Oh,
So yeah, wash with colder temperatures and try and line dry as much as you can because both of those processes release microfibers.
oh, interesting. Interesting.
And then for yourself, try not to microwave plastic. Just don't do it
Oh, do you
for
want
your
to
own
give
for your
us,
own health.
do you want to tell anybody what happens to plastic when we do that, or you just leave it at that? Just don't do
Well,
it.
I mean, it's just the question of the release of chemicals inside of plastic that can end up in your food. Um,
Microwaving really does it big
yeah.
time, as opposed to heating. I
Well, if
guess
you're
that's the only
heating
way
if
we
you,
heat
if
it.
you're heating any like plastic vesicle, you're
Yeah.
likely to
Yep.
release any of those chemicals, especially if it
Okay.
gets older and older.
Yep.
And maybe even microplastics if it starts cracking. You see some cracks, it's not great.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Well, I hope we can all do that and you know clean up this our plastic game. I know mine is um, not very strong at this moment. Are there any sort of uh, I don't know why I'm asking this, but like plastic inventory games you can play or sort of checklists, like maybe you
Oh.
could just do this on your own, like check every plastic thing you touch in an hour or something, and it would, I imagine that would just blow my mind or so. I've always wanted to do that.
Ooh.
Like,
I'm sure there is a game. The the first thing when you brought it up that came to my mind was like what's called a waste audit, where
mm,
you just take into account for an entire week or even a month, like everything you throw away. And, so that you can be more aware of how much trash that's plastic associated that
mm,
you're, kind of using. I know plasticfreejuly.org, it's not July anymore, but it's still useful for the rest of our life. They have a waste audit, I believe, and a few other like pesky plastic quizzes, like do you get meat that's not wrapped in plastic? And that's how do you do that? It just
mm,
depends on the store you're in, I guess.
yeah.
But yeah, there's some interesting sites. I can send you at least that one,
Oh
add
yeah,
into the
that I would
description.
love to find that out, and I could definitely add it into the description for sure. So, a final word, if people want to find out more about you and your work, how could they do that?
So I have a YouTube channel, and it's just under my name, Imari Walker, Imariwalker, and I have videos on I have videos on microplastic pollution, on chemicals and our consumer products, even just like what does it take to be an environmental engineer or get involved in a PhD or just
Oh,
like
great.
consider what research is. So I've got quite a few different subsections if anybody's interested in any of that, but they should all be for all knowledge levels and interests.
Oh,
And
great.
then I also have a Twitter and an Instagram, and that is at calamari93, CALIMARI 93.
That's a play on your name, I guess.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it's good.
I'm oceanographer. I'm a calamari.
Oh, that too. Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Imari, and thank you all out there for watching. This has been another video in our series called Ask a Scientist. If you learned something from this video, let us know in the comments below, and stay tuned to what we're doing at the Duke Forest Teaching and Research Laboratory by signing up for our newsletter and following us on social media. Until next time, have a nice day, and may the forest be with you.